Okay, so we're gonna start. We have this uh, little setup of two watercolor brushes and two tubes of paint. Uh, a couple different ways we can approach this. I'm gonna start with putting down the lighter colors first, um, and that's gonna be in these paint tubes here. So I'm gonna get a bit of a. I don't want it to be completely white. I'm gonna put in just a touch of color, just a dab. I don't even know if I'm going to put it in for the whole thing. There's going to be little bits I'm going to leave out, but just a little bit here, just to give it a bit of color. And even that seems a bit dark, so I'm going to add some water around it. And some of this is going to be, it's going to dry lighter. Even still, I'm going to pull out some of this. I'm pulling it out by uh, drying my brush out and just dragging it through the color. Not dragging, what am I saying? Like pressing it into the color so it soaks it back up. So, uh, yeah, gonna let that dry. Gonna move over to now the highlights on the brushes. I'll leave those, but we can work on the bristles. I'll mix up an orange, which is Nicolazzo yellow, and quinacridone magenta. Um, let's see. Use a scrap piece of paper here to test out your colors, just to make sure this isn't white. Would recommend using a white piece of paper, but it's what I got. Just testing it out. That's a nice brown color. I think it'll do. Just putting it in here. And it is going to dry lighter because that's the nature of watercolor. This one might make a little bit yellower. A bit more water to it. Just so they're a little different. Not really that much different. And I will go over these again to just vary it up a little bit as I go around. Gonna let that dry. You can tell if something's dry by using the back of your hand. If it feels cool, it's still wet. But this is feels dry. So I'm gonna jump back over to my little tubes of paint here. Uh, yeah, I guess we can put in some of those little shadow colors. From the light coming in, it makes them, they look like a neutral bluish purple to me. So I'm going to mix up a purple, a bluish purple, and then add complement red, yellow, I believe. No, that would be red orange. Complement blue purple is red orange. So it's mostly a red color. It's going to be mixed in with it. Okay, let's see how that looks. It looks a little dark, but other than that, it's pretty. I find it's pretty close. So that's what we're looking for here. And it's not gray. It's a neutral. It's almost like a greenish gray, but I think it'll do. So I'm just gonna go around looking at my object, seeing where all those little shadows are. Just putting them in. Um, there's not too many soft edges on these shadows. They're all pretty sharp edged. So I'm not worrying too much just yet about putting in the softer edges. Maybe a bit though. I think a little bit would be good. some of these spots in here. If you splash paint on your paper, if you wanted to get it off of there, you want to get it off sooner than later. Because otherwise it will dry and leave little puddles. Which if you don't want, sometimes it can look pretty cool actually having little puddles of paint, but if they're not what you're going for, then it's best just to get rid of them. So again, clean brush, clean water. Just pushing the paint around a little bit to soften the edges there. And also to soften the paint so it's not so sharp. Not so dark. Okay, that's gonna dry a little bit lighter. You can use that same mixture over here because the underside of this has a reflection. And this is gonna help. We're gonna help show that reflection here. Gonna put this in over the whole thing. Then it'll dry. We can go in and put the shadow. There's a real quite dark bit on top of it. We're gonna have to wait for it to dry. A lot of waiting for things to dry in watercolor. That's still wet. This is dry. So maybe I'll work on the handle here. That's sort of a greenish, sort of a neutrally green color, isn't it? That brush handle. So I'm gonna mix up a nice green. Put in its opposite, which is red. Maybe a bit more yellow, a bit more green, a bit more red. There we go, looks nice. Good water. And you can use your brush to actually get a nice uniform. Just slowly pick it up as you move it down. You get a nice, nice clean set of brush strokes, generally. Something good to practice at, for sure. Okay, that looks nice. We're going to jump over to the other one. We're going to use the same color, but for the whole thing, because the highlight, even the highlight on this brush handle is going to be kind of a gray color. All right. So we're going to let those dry. This should be dry by now. Two different things we can do here. We can put in the colors, the blues and the reds, or the blacks. I'm going to go for the blacks here. I'm making my own black. Mixing up purple with a bit of yellow. This yellow is pretty strong. Okay, so we're going to put in actually probably a couple different coats of black here. If you try to put in a dark color all at once on watercolor, it could look flat sometimes. So we'll put this in just a little bit at a time. Yeah, I'm gonna leave little bits of white spot for the those little reflections of light there. All right, do you want to make your lines pretty clean? So go out here. There we go. That. Yeah, making my line nice and plain. Okay, I'm going to switch over to my clean brush because I do want some of these to be softer these edges. And that's so, it's not white, the reflection on there. I'll try to dampen it down just a bit, so it's not so. Also, I don't want that to be the focal point. You know, your eye goes where like there's the strongest color, where there's the sharpest black against white, where there's the sharpest, sharpest lines. Those are places that your eye goes in paintings. So I don't want them to be down here. But again, I'm going to come back into this area with another layer once it starts to dry again. So checking these, those seem pretty dry. Really the only thing that's still wet is this up here. I've put in a bit of water. Oh, you know what? No, else is that same color. Is the caps. Caps are the same. I might as well do those while I'm here. They look this here. Except, you know what? The caps are lighter. They're not super black. So I need to make sure that I'm not having too dark in here. It's looking a little bit too dark. Just a skosh too dark here. Let's see. Color in there. Okay. What's next? You know what? While I've got this black color, I'm going to run it down. There's a bit of a bead here. Just run it right down the edge, just like that. And it does leave a clean line, although I do want to make sure to put this in here. This shows that there's a good reflection. There we go. Okay. So brushes are coming together. Yeah, I'll have to come back to this part. Not thrilled about it, but now let's see. Red in there. Come back, make this darker again. Just yeah, keep in mind all the values in between each different item. I don't want this to be too sharp of a line, so I'm going to smooth it out just a bit. Push that color back out. So if I went a little bit too far with that color, if that happens to you, you can wait for it to dry a bit, and then you can start to pull it out. It's going to be hard to get the paper right back to white again, but you can sort of scrub it, get it lighter than it was. But it's recommended to wait until it dries a bit. Work on it. And if you're still having trouble, you could take a paper towel, but should make sure to make a nice point, otherwise you take out all your paint. Okay. So I'll let that dry, I'll come back to it. the blue band I'm going to work on next. So actually, even though it says cobalt, I'm using ultramarine blue. I find they're very similar, the two colors. They're pretty close to one another here. So I'm just gonna sub it. Just putting it in there, making it darker, you know, around the edge as it starts to curl under. Plus, I really want to get this nice little Daniel Smith cylinder down here. I find it's just a few triangles here. Easier to paint with something like this. It's easier to paint the negative space around it than to try to paint the actual flower itself or whatever design that is. It just makes it easier on you because yeah, it's a pretty complex little design here. Yeah, even that's not perfect, but it's going to get us close to where we're going to want to go with this. Okay. What's next? What is next? I might come back to that again with some other color just to richen it up. So right now, that actually helps give it form now. Before it looked sort of like this kind of bland. Now it actually has a shape to it. That's a good sign. So I'm gonna jump over here. This is about the same color that's in that tube, but on the outside it looks more reddish orange. Or maybe just red, but it's more orange than this quinacridone magenta. I'm gonna add some red, some yellow to it to sort of get us there. Try it out here. Let's see. Just gonna go around, paint my red in. It's a pretty dark color when I'm putting it down. You can lighten it up, especially around like where the sunlight's coming in, where the light direction. You can lighten that side up a bit. This is a bit of a stainy color, so if you pull it off, you can have a nice bit of color underneath. So that shows a gradation. And the focus. And put in the other little square here. Detail. And a lot of this is just kind of following the contour of the tube. I picked some pretty bent ones on purpose just to give it that sort of texture and interest. Like a brand new tube of paint doesn't really have any history or anything like that. But something like this has a lot more going on with it. Yeah, there we go. Although, yeah, okay. And you see it again, that gives it a lot more form and dimension than just having a general mass on there. Okay. I think I'm going to start putting in the shadows next. I just have this on a white piece of paper, so it's just sort of a general neutral shadow, which this color here I think will work pretty well. This is that color we mix up. If you look at it, it's a bit of a sort of a gray-green color. It's just a good neutral color. I think it'll work really well for shadows here. So I'm just gonna, I've already drawn them in. It does look a bit light though, doesn't it? I might have to make this mixture darker. So it's mostly blue and yellow, but there is some red in there, both to darken it up and to neutralize it, because we really don't want a hot green shadow. I want that saturation to be quite low. So as it gets further away from the object, the edges do soften. So I want to take my clean brush here. Grab this one here. Get some clean water on there. And just sort of run it along the edge here. That's going to create a nice soft edge. I might leave that broken edge there. I kind of like that broken edge look on it. But if it was right underneath, like you're going to see on these ones here, some of this shadow, like when it starts right there, it's pretty sharp. And as it moves away, it gets softer. Just putting in this color here. It's going to help negatively paint a negative shape around that tube of paint there to further define its form. That's good. Just get a nice soft shadow in there. And just same thing over here. In this instance, the shadow is lighter in some parts than the actual brush. The rosemary brush has a dark, a black enamel that it uses. Soft, nice soft edge along there. While I have this on my brush, I'm gonna use it to define the ferrule, little ferrule on this. Yeah. This the shadow bit on here is a little bit too, like that reflected light is too high. It's not dark enough. So we'll have to go in and darken that. I'm gonna wait for it to dry. This look, it turned out pretty well. We were able to get that highlight back, so that's good. We go with a bit more. Hopefully it's dry by now. Almost dry. Shadow here. And then I'm gonna put in little crimping bits. Backside. There was a bit of a shadow on this side as well. Get all this nice little details in there. Again, these will dry lighter. I do want to soften this edge here though, just to give it some variety. Okay. Let's see, what's next? I could use a watery version of that, I think, for even more shadows in this. Ooh, that's not watery enough. I really want to paint I want to make it so you could almost see like where my thumb pushed into the tube of paint, you know, like right in this area. So just following that contour of it, just trusting, you know, that process of just looking and putting the paint where you see it. That's the that's what's gonna help. That's what's gonna help create that shape when you're working for something complicated like this. And I am gonna go around and soften some of these edges. I don't want them too. I don't want them all to be too sharp. You know, I'll soften them up. Some bit of shadow in here. Okay. What else? What else? What else? Where are we going next? So I hope those don't dry too dark. They look a little too dark right now. Scrub out some of that color where my thumb goes. These tubes. Hopefully that will help define the whatever it is that. These need shadow. That's gonna help give it form, more form. Putting that in here. Let's see. Okay, gonna soften my edges up, except for closer I get to this point, it's gonna be pretty sharp. Because that's, so if you don't clean your brush, that's what you get right there. Maybe soften a little bit. You can always come back in and make your shadows darker, either while they're still wet or after it dries. The lines look too sharp. Just add a bit more. Okay. And then same thing over here. The shadow's fairly sharp. Just edge here. And a bit more. Make it darker and darker a little bit. And again, for the edges, nice and most of them nice and soft. I think that one there I'll keep sharp. That's just how this is part of the process how I think about things. You see when you put shadows in there, it really helps give them life. Give them a sense of being. So this is still the same green. I like it. It looks like a piece of jade or something, but it's not what we're going for. So I'm going to mix up a darker version of the green we were using. Just more paint. And then it's opposite. Red, neutralize it down. Too red, so it's adding some colors back in. Okay. So again, this has two highlights. So I'm using a smaller brush this time, coming straight down. And I do want to soften the edges I'm not sure this brush will be the right size for it, so I'm going to actually switch to a smaller brush. I do want these edges a little softer here. If I use that larger brush, for this instance, it might be too big. This one I really don't want those highlights, those reflected lights to be too bright. Work that color into it. Okay, so I'll let that dry. Going back to this rosemary brush. Might put a bit of red into this green mixture. Just bring it down again. Make it dark. So. Also up here. I think this time I'm going to bring the color down here so it's not so bright. Okay. Just about there. I do want to add more brown to these bristles. So I'm going to take my orange color we made, add to the green. Then clean brush, clean water. Just putting that right up. Maybe get rid of these little whites in there. Thought they would be good, but they're kind of distracting. Over here. Just putting these in there, getting some texture. The bristles. Like so. Okay. Let's see. Getting towards the end here, looking for places that need more. I think this shadow could be enhanced. Just gotta wait for it to dry and then put it in. And coming in with a clean brush, clean water. Softening that edge there, this edge. I might leave that shadow lighter because it enhances how dark that brush is. Softening those white points so not jumping out at you. Yeah, I think we're just about there. All right, so that is how to paint 2 brushes, 2 tubes of watercolor paint. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments or email me. And yeah, happy painting.